Dear colleagues, dear students, so at the beginning I would like to introduce the areas that I analyzed within the project in relation to the principle of equality of member states. And so in all these areas, listed areas, I tested this principle within legal and factual changes of founding treaties, exemptions to primary law, enhanced cooperation, potential for suspension of cooperation, and then membership termination. And so it was this last area, EU membership termination, that led in fact to the topic of my presentation today, which is, as it was already said, particularly interesting because of the fact it represents a kind of intersection of European Union law and international law. So when circumstances change, are we pushing the limits of Rebus Stantibus under the Article 50 of the EU Treaty? Actually, why I'm mentioning, of course, the Article 50, because, as you know, it was adopted within the Lisbon Treaty, and it provides a really detailed procedure of member states' withdrawal from the European Union. So that means that the impact of the doctrine or clausula Rebus Stantibus on the possibility of withdrawing from the Union is in this way more theoretical than practical. But there can be maybe some cases in which it can be applied. So the question resides in the fact to what extent we can transpose the principle of Rebus Stantibus, the principle of international law, into the European Union legal order. So this is a short introduction to Rebus principle. Of course, this principle is not only known in public law, it's also known with some modifications in private law, so it's really a well-known principle. It permits in the international law the treaty withdrawal if circumstances, of course, change fundamentally. It's a legal principle that is codified, as you can see, in the Vienna Convention on the law of treaties, which most states, including EU member states, recognize. However, we can say that evoking this principle is very, very rare and it's subject to very strict conditions. And so the clausula Rebus Stantibus, as of course any other exception, should be interpreted very strictly. As you can see, it can interfere also, or mainly, with the general principle of pacta sunt servanda, which is enshrined in the Article 4 of the Treaty on the European Union. So these are detailed legal requirements which are stated in the Vienna Convention. So the Vienna Convention and also International Court of Justice case law outlines very strict rules for applying Rebus Stantibus, and these criteria ensure that this principle is used not often and shouldn't be abused, of course. So among these principles or definition, there is a change of circumstances at the time of the conclusion of a treaty that must be fundamental and unforeseen. Then initial circumstances must have formed an essential basis for the consent to be bound by the treaty. Effect of such change of circumstances should radically transform obligations, and this clausula should be invoked within the reasonable period of time from the moment of the fundamental change. There was also a case law in Gabčíkovo-Nadmaroš case when the International Court of Justice stated that, for example, major political and environmental changes doesn't represent the reason to use this clausula Rebus Stantibus. So these are, in shortly, of course, legal requirements stated in the Vienna Convention and the case law of the International Court of Justice. And then we have to see how the European Union and the Court of Justice is incorporating international law into European Union legal order. So European Union law, of course, respects international law, but the European Court of Justice doesn't overtake all international law principles into the European Union legal order. Of course, what we can say that the European Union recognizes customary international law, and this principle is a part of customary international law, principle of Rebus in Stantibus. And there is a case in which the European Court of Justice in judgment Rake accepted the rule of Rebus in Stantibus. It said that the rules of customary international law concerning the termination and the suspension of treaty relations by reason of fundamental change of circumstances are binding upon the community institutions and form part of the community legal order. So this is a very clear statement, but the problem is, of course, that the judgment cannot be generalized to the primary law of the European Union because it concerned external agreement of the European Union with former Yugoslavia. We cannot compare international treaties to the founding treaties of the European Union. So even if, of course, founding treaties can be governed by the regime of Vienna Convention, they have very, very specific status compared to other international treaties because they are establishing a supranational union with its own legal order, in which the EU law takes precedence over national law, and so we can more compare them to a kind of constitution rather than international treaties. That's why this judgment, of course, is not transposable by analogy to founding treaties. So now, what's the point of the Article 50? It is article of the Treaty of the European Union which really offers a clear and legal and recognized process for withdrawal, including unilateral withdrawal on unilateral basis. As I said, it was introduced with Lisbon Treaty and first time used by United Kingdom. So any member state can use the Article 50 without invoking external doctrine of international law, Rebus ex stantibus. So that's why it is really debatable. It remains debatable how the doctrine of Rebus ex stantibus could materialize in practice in the case of the European Union's founding treaties. But although the Union's founding treaties do not provide a legal basis for the activation of Rebus ex stantibus, it doesn't mean or it doesn't constitute an obstacle per se for activating this doctrine on the basis of international law. So there is also a theory that the principle of Rebus ex stantibus cannot be applied due to the transfer of part of member states' sovereignty to the European Union. Because sovereignty in the European Union is somehow shared, while states remain still sovereign, they have pulled some kind or part of sovereignty in specific policy areas, and this complicates the invocation of clausula Rebus ex stantibus, which relies on classical notion of states' autonomy. So when member states permanently limited the part of their sovereignty that has been conferred upon the European Union, that means that they can not invoke the rebus sic stantibus related or in relation to the powers they already conferred upon the European Union. This is a quite interesting theory. So what are the practical now, not theoretical, but practical barriers to applying rebus sic stantibus in founding treaties? The main problem is that if some circumstances arise that the treaties anticipate and address, then the conditions for the applicability of the doctrine are really unlikely to be met. For example, the Article 4 of the Treaty on the European Union addresses respect for national identity and designates national security as the sole responsibility of member states. And similarly, there are other potential circumstances such as internal, it is included in the Article 347, like the internal disturbances affecting the maintenance of law and order in the event of war, serious international tension constituting a threat of war, or in order to carry out obligations member state has accepted for the purpose of maintaining peace and international security. So in this case, this article allows for the member state to derogate from the treaty in such situations. So once these situations are foreseen by the treaty itself, they cannot be invoked within the principle of rebus sic stantibus. Also, for example, when the member state is breaching, one of the member states is breaching the European Union law or treaties or fundamental principles, we have on one hand, we have action for non-fulfillment of obligation that can be, of course, dealt by the Court of Justice. And then we have also Article 7 when it comes to fundamental principles. So Union has internal remedies for such situations. And in addition to this, I would like also to add that the principle of reciprocity that is known in international law was refused by the Court of Justice, of course. When one member state is not is breaching EU law, doesn't mean that other member states can do so, also breach the European Union law. So this is also the problem and the barrier to applying rebus sic stantibus. So now finally, in which situation it can be applied. First, of course, we have to consider the situation when the EU available mechanisms are failing, so that the situation will be that the member state is invoking the doctrine as a last resort. It could be used in situation when the EU treaties do not foresee, which are really difficult to find in practice to fulfill the condition of unforeseeability. We can cite maybe specific or very special examples when, for example, when the European Union should or would adopt any acts ultra vires, but also in absence of judicial review by the Court of Justice. So there should be some institutional collapse or authoritarian takeover of powers by the European Union to invoke this principle of rebus sic stantibus. And I remember that David is not here now, but yesterday we discussed this topic with David Sehnalek, and his perspective was also interesting because he can imagine the possibilities of invoking this clausula rebus sic stantibus in a situation when a member state wishes to withdraw from the European Union with immediate effect, because the Article 50 allows to withdraw or allows unilateral withdrawal only after 2 years, when the withdrawal treaty or agreement is not concluded. In such case, after 2 years from the from asking for withdrawal, the member state can withdraw from the European Union. So maybe this could be another possibility of invocation of this principle. So we can really conclude that using the principle of clausula or clausula rebus sic stantibus remains more theoretical option than practical one in the European Union context. And these are the questions for the discussion, maybe for the later one. Some interesting ones. For example, if a future crisis could legitimize the rebus sic stantibus crisis, European Union ones, or should international doctrines like rebus sic stantibus, should they override regional constitutionalism? This is also a nice question. And then whether this rebus clausula is more of a diplomatic argument than a legal tool. Thank you for your attention.